What were your last few articles that you've been writing since you've had that free time?
Well, the last one I did just released today. I was taking a look at MVP odds, and it was interesting. After the Wentz trade, his odds went down, meaning bettors felt he was more likely to be the MVP. And so I kind of correlated that to the change in his value in Dynasty and the expectation that he would have a better season than, it was thought a month ago. And if you can if you look at the odds and, pick out some of that stuff and you watch the movement in the odds, it can give you an indication of what maybe non-fantasy football people think is going to happen to players' stats.
Yeah.
What's up, Mike?
That makes like plenty of sense, when it comes to trying to figure out where they're actually going and what their values could be. So I love that concept. All right, let's go ahead and get this. Go ahead. No, what were you about to say?
Dynasty, you're always looking for an edge over your competition. And where can you get information that other people aren't getting information to kind of beat them to the punch? And I kind of felt like that was an interesting approach to sort of look at what the bettors are doing that aren't necessarily playing fantasy football.
Yeah, no, I love that concept. And actually with everything kind of breaking down with all these states being allowed to bet and stuff now, I think that prop betting and whatnot is going to take a huge jump, and you're going to see a lot of analysts actually jump to that side as well and kind of, start to research a little bit more. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone at that point. I love that concept. All right, let's go ahead and get the show kicked off. Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention, guys. Let's go.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. We have another episode coming at y'all of how to start a podcast. But this isn't just about how to start a podcast. It's about how to, create a business essentially and how to get into the fantasy football community. And we have so many different ways of doing it. You have, podcasts like we talked about, live shows, helping out behind the scenes, doing editing and whatnot. And then we have, of course, writing. And so I had to bring in one of the best editors out there in the business. We have Dennis in the house. What's going on, Dennis? How you doing?
Well, it's I'm doing great. It's fitting that this is an intervention show. My name is Dennis, and I'm a fantasy football addict.
In all the episodes, we've done over 500 episodes, and nobody's came in with an intro like that. And it's like, it's almost a given. It's like a low-hanging fruit. Nobody's taking it. And you crushed it.
I'm a low-hanging fruit kind of guy,
I love that. You got to take the easy ones.
I'm actually a recovering alcoholic too. I had 20 years sober last June. So I'm used to that sort of approach to meetings. No, it's great.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to kind of discussing. There's a lot of avenues you can take to make your way in the fantasy football industry. And this is certainly going to be a fun chat.
No, it's something that I've been very interested about. I've been wanting to talk about with somebody, because of the fact that I didn't get in through writing. And that's such a critical piece in order to develop yourself as a, somebody that's going to provide fantasy football content. I started off with my shows, of course, and doing show sheets and all that fun stuff. And it was actually on a handwritten notepad that I started out this stuff. And, I realized about, a little bit, less than a year ago. That's probably 6-8 months ago. It's a lot better if you actually put, I guess your articles and your show sheets and all that stuff, not on paper, but actually on the computer, because you can go back and reference it. You can find stuff you were talking about. But when I came in, I started out with Dynasty Happy Hour. And my first article I ever wrote was absolutely atrocious. I mean, I was using caps, like all caps throughout my things when I was trying to make a point. It looked like a show sheet or like a Twitter thread that you'd sit there and you'd read. And, it's something that's, it'll never escape my mind what my editor said to me the first time I sent in a submission, Jacob over there for Dynasty Happy Hour. He pretty much said it back to me almost immediately and said, "This shit sucks. What are you doing? Don't use all caps to yell at me. You don't have this right. You don't have this right. You don't have this right." Did you even look at our writing standards that we had? So it was it was very, very impactful, the way that I was kind of sat down and yelled at like I was, in third grade all over again by your parents. But instead it was an official editor. So, I guess, how did you get into editing and how did you get into writing and how did you start with Dynasty Nerds?
Well, I started in the industry back in 2018. So I've been playing fantasy football for probably 15 years. I started back in the 90s and then I took a long break and then I started back up somewhere around 2010 or 2011. And I was playing in redraft leagues and I had one home league and then it became like a 2-keeper league. And probably 2017, 16 or 17, I heard about dynasty leagues and I wanted to play in dynasty leagues. And so I kept every offseason for 2 or 3 years, I would propose we become a dynasty league and everybody would vote it down. And then I saw Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life app book, and I went and read the book and found out about the app. I went on the Fantasy Life app, and there was a chat in there called Dynasty League Questions. And so I joined the Dynasty League Questions chat, and like most chats anywhere, people posted orphans. So I took over an orphan in a free league, a 20-team league. And the team was stacked. I was in that league. I stayed in that league for 3 years, won the league 2 out of the 3 years. But it probably wasn't so much my management as it was I took over a really good team and then just didn't screw it up. And the only reason I left it, I like the guys, but I hit a point where I don't like to play in leagues that I don't have like at least $5 in. And I want to play for something other than pride. I like money. So I turned that team over to somebody else. And in the interim, I had started playing in other dynasty leagues. The Dynasty League Questions chat actually formed the official Dynasty Questions League, Fantasy Football League, which is now currently my longest running fantasy football league. I think we're on our 5th season now, 4th or 5th season. And so I just started getting more involved playing Dynasty and watching things happen on the Fantasy Life app. I started to see people creating content. The Falafel House podcast with Sal Lito and Kevin Cotillo.
I love Sal.
And I forget the other guy, Sid Skeet. I forget his real name. And then I watched.
That works.
Yeah. And then I watched like 2 Drink Minimum and Swags create their podcasts and other things were coming out. And they started doing a Fantasy Life blog where that you could publish articles. And so I reached out and I'm like, hey, what do you got to do to write for your blog, for your site? And the editor was none other than Nighthawk 7734, Mr. Matthew Fox, one of my co-hosts on the Fantasy Football Roundtable, and now a writer for Dynasty Nerds as well. And he's like, well, send me an article. And I wrote an article, and he reached back out to me and was like, that's pretty good. What do you want to do? And I'm like, you know what? I want to do a weekly column, and we'll release it on Tuesday. It'll be about Dynasty Fantasy Football. He's like, sounds great. And the reason I went that route was I wanted to develop the discipline of writing a weekly column. having that hard deadline. It needed to be in to the editor. It was going to publish. And for the most part, for a year, I was pretty much on time. A couple times I was late. A couple times I was like, you know what, I've hit a wall. I'm going to skip this week. But part of the reason I wanted to get that catalog of work out there also was I wanted to join the FSWA. I'm like, I want to get those. I want to have those credentials.
Yeah.
And for them, you have to publish at least 4 articles. You have to be active in the writing industry for at least a year. So I hit my year. I applied, paid my dues, and now I'm a member of the FSGA or FSWA. And during that year of writing that column, Rich Dotson of Dynasty Nerds reached out to me. So going back to the DQL chat, when I was like, hey, where do I find information about Dynasty Leagues? 9 out of 10 comments were, oh, go check out the Dynasty Nerds podcast and dynastynerds.com.
Because Dynasty Nerds is the go-to, man. Like that's the channel.
And so I started listening to it, and I started reading and working up. Probably the biggest challenge switching from redraft to Dynasty is, how do you value draft picks? How do you value rookie draft picks in relation to players? And that was really an area I struggled with. So I was really into the Dynasty Nerds podcast. I'd listened to them for probably 2 or 2.5 years. And now I'm writing for the Fantasy Life app. And I get a DM from Rich, like probably June or July of that year. And he's like, hey, you want to write for a Dynasty site? And I was like, dude, yes, I do. And as a matter of fact, it's yours. So I started to write. Now, I had that weekly commitment to the Fantasy Life app, and I didn't I didn't want to break that commitment, because to me it was about the discipline to write a weekly column. You know, that's something. You watch some of these sports writers, and they're putting out a column every week. And I thought to myself, if I want to do something in this industry, I need to develop good habits. And so whether it was
one of my traditional like requirements is, hey, and by the way, I'm one of the most unorganized people you'll ever meet. Like, I'm not even going to show my house right now because it's so unorganized. But I mean, sitting there and having like that, like you just talked about, like that commitment and that development to sit down and do something every single week at the same time and expect it. Like, how many people go out and look for Matthew Berry's love-hate column that comes out at the same time every week? You know, and it's something that takes discipline and it takes organization. But continue, please talk about, you know, your feelings towards it.
It hit the point where I contributed a few articles to Dynasty Nerds, and then we got into the season. I'm managing my teams. I'm writing for the Fantasy Life app, and it was probably November when Josh from Dynasty Nerds, who's one of the co-founders and was the editor at the time, was like, hey, just checking, are you still with us? And I'm like, oh yeah, I am. I have this commitment. It runs to January. Once I'm done there, I'm going to come over to you guys full time. And he's like, okay, cool. I just wanted to check. So I finished up that, and I can't say enough good things about the Fantasy Life app and the Fantasy Life app blog. A great place to start and create content, a great set of communities on there. Like anything else, there's going to be people that are trolly and toxic, and you just kind of have to start to weed that out, figure out how not to engage in that stuff. But that's everywhere. It doesn't, you know, I know Clubhouse is all the new rage. There's going to be assholes in Clubhouse too. Just give it a couple more weeks.
Yeah. Wait till those invites start making its way.
Yeah. And so I started writing for Dynasty Nerds, and I was just writing along, and the site was continuing to grow. And as I saw more people coming on and them talking about, well, we want to do more, we need to write more. They were working on different things like the rankings system that they used, and the Dynasty GM and things like that. So in order to grow the site, something had to come off of Josh's plate, which was the editing. And so I just reached out and was like, hey, if you're looking for an editor to take some of this off your plate, I'll be more than happy to do it. Knowing that if I was going to start to edit, that it was going to reduce the amount of time that I was going to write. my role in the industry was going to change from being forward facing to being backward facing.
And
that was something that I had to be willing to accept. It was a great, I looked at it from the standpoint of, well, how do I want to get where I need to go in my career? If I'm going to develop a fantasy football career, whether it's full-time, whether it's part-time, obviously 95% of the people that start want to be the next Matthew Berry or Brad Evans or Liz Loza or Matt Harmon. They're all out there grinding. They want to be Bob Harris on Sirius XM or Howard Bender. That's what most of us want to do. And frankly, it's a low barrier to entry between Twitter and Medium and StreamYard. You can create websites, podcasts, WordPress. It doesn't take a whole lot of money, and it doesn't take, there's not a high bar to keep you out. So you have to then figure out, well, what's my role? What am I going to do? When Carson Wentz got traded, there's 11 billion podcasts, and all of them needed to talk about Carson Wentz.
Yep.
Now, some of them were matter of fact. This is what I think it means. This is what the trade was for, and moved on and stuff. Others were, sensationalized and trying to find, I got to be unique. I can't just say it was good or bad. And that's great. I'm not a hot take guy. I understand that some takes get classified as hot, but do some work, do your research, have your, make proclamations you can stand by. There's nothing, what is it? Which stars burn the fastest? Is it the red stars or the blue stars? Whichever ones, whites, I forget. I was going to look that up before I came on because I was going to use that as my analogy and totally forgot. hot take artists are like those stars that burn fast. You can't keep it up because you end up having to find more and more and more ridiculous takes. And they're just not always there. And you end up trying to create something out of nothing. And then next thing you know, you're out there saying that you're gonna, eat a jar of mayonnaise or eat a Lego if something happens. And no offense to either one of those fellas, but that was just ridiculous. So, I started editing. I'm behind the scenes. We have around somewhere between 75 to 100 contributors to Dynasty Nerds. Thanks, Mike. And it's the white or blue star that shines, that burns the fastest and the hottest. I ended up making a conscious decision to be behind the scenes. Now, I also am part of a podcast that was going on, and shout out to Sports Fanatic MB and Nighthawk 7734. I'm able to ride their coattails. The first year of the Fantasy Football Roundtable, Matt did 5 shows a week solo. 5. We as a group of people from the Fantasy Life app, were like, hey, it'd be great to do a podcast. We can do this. And then all of a sudden, everybody was busy but Matt. And he literally did 5 shows a week that first year. The following year, I came on board and we cut down to, we did 2 shows in the off season. I think 4 shows in season. And I only did a couple of them. I'm married. I got 2 kids. I work a full-time job. My wife is home in the evening when I am. And so I have to, be a little measured in the amount of time I commit to it. So that was my outlet. I wrote occasionally. I think I wrote in 2020, I think I wrote 6 articles, maybe 5 articles. But finding out where you fit and what you want to accomplish is super important. Not everybody is a great editor. Being perfectly honest, I'm probably a mediocre editor at best. There's times when I'll get a message about a typo and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe I missed that. But a lot of times too, I'm editing it, 11:30, midnight, 1 a.m. After hanging out with my family, and I get tired and stuff.
Yeah, But that's part of the grind. That's what it takes.
It is. You've got to kind of do that and figure out where it fits for you. People who are really great at it burn out as well, not because they're the white stars, hot take shiners shining bright, but they end up having to they lose the balance in their life, and you have to sort of figure that out. I find that I'll fall prey to that as well. It's not uncommon for me to sit and edit while my wife and I watch TV, and I'm only half paying attention to the TV. I pay attention enough that I suppose I'll make a comment about The Bachelor or Below Deck Mediterranean, enough to make her feel like I'm a little bit participating. I could probably do better. But I hate those shows. So I feel like, but we had years where I watched football. I could watch all the sports I wanted as long as I rubbed her feet. Now she watches all the shows she wants, but I get to work on my editing and do my fantasy football stuff while we're doing it.
No, that works. That works.
Kind of worked out. It's been a decent trade.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's hop into this show, and talk about some of the stuff that some of these new writers might want to discover and capitalize on in terms of all the stylistic approaches, the grammar approaches, and everything like that. Right before we do, I do want to talk about our podcast, of course. Make sure you guys go check it out. We're everywhere you can be found on podcasts. Fantasy Intervention. Make sure you guys go hit like and subscribe. All of our content will go back onto the podcast after these live shows, of course, so you can revisit them and listen to them on your way to work if you don't have time to actually watch the full show. We also have youtube.com/fantasy intervention. Once again, that's youtube.com/fantasy intervention. Make sure you guys go hit subscribe. Now, writing isn't the easiest thing to do, especially when you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to approach it properly. Each website has their niches and different things that they want to attack, or they want to go after, or they want to fix, or they want to, phrase a certain way. They're all looking for something a little bit different. The main, I guess, goal is just to make sure that, it's all in uniform, but essentially, like, they're just trying to find, different or the same way to do things across the board. So if you guys are looking for writing standards, first off, you can go to fantasyintervention.com and check out our writing standards. We actually have a standards page where you can go check out the majority of the industry and how they follow. For example, you don't put WR when you're putting wide receiver. You actually spell out wide receiver. Very simple things like that. We have a full-on writing standards page for new writers out there if you want to learn how to write properly. Fantasyintervention.com once again. But I want to start out with my first question for you is, what do you look for in writers when you guys are looking to acquire new ones? Is there anything in general that you look for?
Well, you look for people that can put a sentence together. In part, it's easy to say, you know what, I want to bring in top level names. I want to have people that everybody knows so that they'll go to my website and read the work on our website and buy the products that we sell and listen to our podcast. But the truth of the matter is, you also want people that want to do it. And sometimes, everybody has to start somewhere. So you don't necessarily have to have a portfolio of articles to become a writer. You just reach out and ask somebody from the website, hey, are you guys looking for writers? Or like I did when I was over on the Fantasy Life app, I literally just sent him a message and said, hey, what do you got to do to write for you guys? And as people move through the industry, you'll cycle through different sites. Everybody's trying to find, where can I maximize my impact? Where can I make the most money? Where can I get the most eyes on my work? Things like that. And so it ends up being that you're always looking for people that are brand new that just want to get started. I started following this cat on Twitter, and I wish I could remember his name this past week. He's a 14-year-old. And he's just starting out, and it's like, I watch so many people be like, hey, why don't you come on my show? Hey, we're, welcome aboard. And that's sort of the welcome that I have and the welcome I try to put out to people. Occasionally, sometimes people just don't fit. Like I've had writers come on and want to write for Dynasty Nerds, and all they want to do is DFS material. And I'm like, well, we're pretty narrowly focused in what we do. If you can't tie it to Dynasty Fantasy Football, then it doesn't fit us. It doesn't mean it's a bad article or it's a bad concept. It just doesn't fit us. It's like with the article that released today about betting odds for MVP and Carson Wentz. You might not necessarily think that applies to fantasy football or dynasty, but when people have when the money line to hit the MVP is low, that means people that aren't necessarily writing fantasy or playing fantasy football end up they think that player X is going to have a great year. And getting, in fantasy football, you want people that are going to score the most points on your team. So if all of a sudden a trade happens or a free agent signing occurs, it was Hutchinson Brown was that dude. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Thank you, Mike.
You end up with a move where the odds on somebody being the MVP go from like plus 4,000 to plus 2,000. And it's really, it's like, well, if I can get ahead and trade for that guy before people realize that this is happening, that's an advantage to you. I don't know. I kind of got off track. I went tangential there a little bit.
You're good. No, we're sitting there, we're discussing like the fact of like what you're looking for with writers essentially. And you talked about how, things might not fit for dynasty purposes. And I actually wrote an article where you sent it back to me and you're like, this doesn't really apply to what we're looking for in dynasty. Can you make this more fantasy relevant? So I had to go back personally and I had to rewrite the article. So I know what you're talking about. And you guys are somewhat strict over there when it comes to making sure that it applies to dynasty, because guess what? That's your brand. That's your baby. You need to make sure that it fits it. So I understand completely what you're going with there.
We have like 11,000 people in our Facebook chat, Dynasty Nerds Facebook chat. And if you post something redraft in there, man, people are all over it and the moderators are pulling it out. They're like, no, this is dynasty. It doesn't apply. And you're right. It is the brand. And we do want to stay focused with what we're doing there. We also don't want to disregard good information. And so if we can apply it to what it is we do, getting started or being a writer for Dynasty Nerds, if you don't have any experience, so let's say you email me or you reach out to me on Twitter, one of the questions I ask is, do you have experience? And I always try to include the caveat that not having experience doesn't mean no. But if you don't have experience, then what I want is I'll say, well, where do you think your expertise lies? When it comes to dynasty fantasy football, where would you consider yourself an expert? So if you say, well, I'm an expert at trade values, or I'm an expert at rookie evaluation, I'm an expert at analytics, then I'm going to ask you, well, write me a 500 to 700 word sample on whatever topic you say you're an expert at. In part, I want you to write about something you feel comfortable, feel like but I want to see, can you write? Are you a good writer? For a long time, I was the only editor at Dynasty Nerds after I took over for Josh. Josh is working on growing the company. We've got
Josh is phenomenal too.
They've rolled out the Dynasty GM. We've got updates to the GM, the Nerd Herd, the additional podcast there. We have a bunch of stuff in the pipeline that's going to happen over the next 3 to 12 months. That's going to be pretty far out. It's really changing the way the game is played from a dynasty perspective. I might be biased. I'll acknowledge that I might be biased. But we were putting out anywhere from 2 to 4 articles a day. And so I was editing pretty much 7 days a week. Now, I don't mind it because I love being involved in the game and seeing what people are writing about. We recently brought on some additional editors. We brought on an assistant editor last year to take some of the load as we started to ramp up. But at our annual meeting we had in January, one of the things we came out with is we're aiming for like 5 new articles a day. And they can't all be, we do 5 rookie profiles a day? We could, but we need to, people want a little more variety than that. So there's strategy, there's analytics, there's team building, veteran player expectations, trade stuff, all kinds of stuff. So we're really, we've branched into IDP pretty heavily. We've adopted.
I know Jordan is a big part of that.
Yeah, as our internal standard, we've adopted Jordan's IDP 1, 2, 3 scoring system. And so getting those, we brought on more editors, I guess is the short story I'm getting to. And that's allowing us to be able to increase the number of articles, get more things going. And it's allowing me maybe to do a little more thing as far as things like working with writers that maybe are struggling with something. Sometimes we have writers that are great writers and they're like, I just don't know what to write about. And other times we have writers that have a ton of ideas, but they start 5 things and never turn anything in. And so for me, it's like, what does this person need?
Yeah, help them, assist them to the goal line. And if you are a new writer, real quick, I do want to show this off. We actually start up a new page on fantasyintervention.com as to where we actually have companies and brands that are searching for talent. If you're a company and you actually want to reach out, just send me an email. We have any kind of contact information. Please include that, a snippet, an image, what you might be looking for content-wise. But for example, let's go ahead and go on to league winners. We have Aisha and Thomas. They started out the league winners podcast and I guess company to an extent. So they're looking for new writers. So if you're looking for somebody, or if you're somebody that's looking, for a company that's trying to train people and trying to, I guess, get these new ideas, these new concepts into play, please go to fantasyintervention.com and check us out. And, we'll refer you over to these other companies that are trying to find new writers. It's going to be an incredible source. And you also have a writing standards guide over there as well, which I mentioned earlier in the show. So Dennis, my next question for you. Is there any way in particular to get noticed? Like, do you read articles for other sites? What's the process for somebody to get noticed by a company like Dynasty Nerds without necessarily having to reach out? Like, how did Rich find you, for example?
Rich found me from, I guess, my articles being on Twitter. Now, we had, I think at that point, there were probably only 30 or 40 contributors to the website, and they were putting out just a few articles a week. I'm not one to sit around and wait to be noticed. If I want to be noticed, I go where I can get noticed. So I love tangents, so I'm going to go off on one now. So when I was younger, when I was younger, I spent my 20s playing bass in metal bands. I had long hair, recorded some demos, did a bunch of stuff like that. Well, my friend Ralph, who was a phenomenal guitar player, helped make sure I was a good bass player. We were in bands together. My philosophy was go to the music store, go to the wall where they're posting ads, find people, and go audition. Ralph's methodology was, I'm so good, somebody will find me. So naturally, I was the guy who always found Ralph. I would go out, I would get in a band, we would need a guitar player, and I would say, hey, I know a guy. And Ralph would come and join the band. He ended up, I left the band, he stayed with that band for the rest of his playing career, all fine and dandy. I went and played in Texas and did other things and whatnot. So for me, it's like, if I want to write for somebody, I will interact with them, go out, let them know, hey, I wrote this article. I'm interested in writing for you. Now, I didn't with Dynasty Nerds because I was in the middle. It was my first year writing, and I was in the middle of executing what my plan was at the time, which was write a column every week for a year and become a member of the FSWA. That was the extent of the plan I had at that point. I was like, that's what I'm doing. Well, when Rich reached out, I was like, hell yeah, because I'm a big fan of the site. Since then, I've being behind the scenes with Dynasty Nerds, I'm pretty fulfilled with Dynasty Nerds and doing the podcast. So I don't look for a lot of, I guess, lateral opportunities. If it's a bigger site where I can put in a piece and we can link back to what I do at Dynasty Nerds, vice versa, we let most of our writers write for other sites, and in their closing, I always tell them, look, put a link to your podcast.
Plug yourself.
Make sure your
Plug
Twitter
yourself.
handle's in there. Let people know, if you started your own website and you're getting 1,000 hits a month and we're over here getting 100,000 and you want to write for us, make sure that those people that are reading the articles you write with us know where to find the rest of the stuff you do.
You guys hear that, Fantasy Intervention team? Because this is where I got it from. I wrote probably close to 30 articles for Dynasty Happy Hour without getting this instruction. And then Dennis said, wait, are you going to promote yourself? And I was like, I never even thought about putting that at an end of an article. And ever since then, Dennis, just to give you a heads up, every single article that comes through that I edit, right? Because we do it through Google Docs. And then I do suggestive editing so they can learn from, what they do. The end of every single one, if they don't have their self-promotion there, I make sure I say, plug yourself. What you doing, fool? And I got it from you because of the fact that it kind of like made me realize, like, hey, you got to promote for yourself as well and help yourself grow. Because if you don't grow, the site doesn't grow. Essentially, like these people who are writers are helping you grow. And if they don't grow, if they're just promoting the same 10 people, that reads their articles, 5 of them probably being, their mom, dad, and brothers and sisters, right? Like, then your site doesn't really grow. So they have to grow as well. Promoting yourself at the tail end of your articles is absolutely crucial. I love that.
Yeah, and it's the fantasy football industry and the dynasty industry, those are big pies. No one company is going to get it all. And frankly, I don't think any one company wants it all. I would much rather have, a little slice of a giant pie than a tart, for lack of a better analogy. I want to work with other people and get to know people in the industry. Competition breeds excellence. And now, I'll be honest, I don't read a ton of other people's work, but we put out 71 articles in February. So I don't have a lot of spare time between doing the podcast and editing articles. And I wrote a few articles. And there's I guess 2 schools of thought when it comes to being a content creator and other people's work. One school is, I want to consume as much of other people's stuff as I can to be supportive. The other one is, I don't want to consume anybody else's stuff because I don't want to subconsciously copy what they're doing. I want to try to have something original. And that's both of those, I think, have merit. But if I'm reading 70 articles a month that we're doing, it doesn't leave a ton of time for me to read a lot of other people's articles. I'll go seek out articles in particular areas. We may only put out 5 or 10 IDP articles a month. So if I'm looking for IDP stuff, I'm going to go along with our 5 or 10 articles, and I'm doing research for leagues that I'm in that have IDP. I'm going to go seek out some more information. If it's Devy or college stuff, and we're only putting out 5 or 10 articles, then I'm going to go and seek out some other stuff. I'm going to go seek out some other stuff to be able to broaden my horizons and form a better opinion for what I'm going after. It can get challenging with time, but you want to be supportive of people in the industry. There's a lot of share groups and things like that, and you don't always get a chance to read everybody's work, or you get on a network, like our podcast is part of a network. And so some of the stuff that's our network has lots of entertainment stuff, not just fantasy football. So you end up getting you see a lot more stuff than maybe you normally would if you kind of silo yourself.
No, and I love that. And it's kind of, network is kind of like what we're trying to create over there at Fantasy Intervention. So, that's something that we're looking into. We should probably talk about after the show. But let's talk about, some of your I guess, ways of discovering people, because you talked about how you can't read more than 70 articles a week, or, you struggle to. Obviously, you try and look at them for references, but Garrett Price actually found me. We talked about blocking schemes for hours on a show one time, and it was absolutely ridiculous. But, he's the one that found me and referred me over to Dynasty Nerds. So are there certain people inside of Dynasty Nerds or other companies that are, scouting or looking for writers that, you should keep an eye out for?
Well, you have to be careful, because what you don't want is the perception of poaching other people's talent. So interacting with other people that are writing for other sites can get a little bit dicey, because for instance, if I think that every time I hire a good writer that you're going to be swooping in to try and steal them from me, then it's going to create tension in our relationship. And like I said, the pie is big. Now, that doesn't mean we want to restrict people's movement by any stretch. And most of our writers do contribute for other sites. But you do when there's certainly a hierarchy, whether it's overt or not. Some writer, you'll find you'll get some people on your team, and you want to make sure you keep that person. You want to make sure they're fully satisfied. And so it's just the way it is. When you find the next Matt Harmon, you want to keep that person on your team. Unfortunately, most fantasy websites, including Dynasty Nerds, don't necessarily have the resources to keep somebody that's going to be a rising talent, or somebody that may be headed in that direction. So you kind of figure out a way, what you can do to work best with people. I kind of have the approach, like, I remember when, I worked in restaurants for about 25 years. And before I went into management, back when I was playing in bands, I was a line cook. And my roadie was a line cook with me. And we were both trainers at this restaurant. And he would say to me, when I would train, "Why are you training people like that? That's not how they're going to do it when they're done training." And his method was to train the shortcuts. And I would tell him, because they'll figure out their shortcuts. And when corporate shows up and is looking over their shoulder and say, "Hey, why are you doing it like that?" And they say, "Well, because that's how my trainer trained me." And they look at him and say, "Who was your trainer?" Well, guess what? They're not going to come and say, "Why are you training like crap? You can't be a trainer anymore." And frankly, trainers got perks. So I'm kind of like, if nobody wants to work with a piece of shit, is kind of my philosophy. So if you have people you like that are good and you're friends with, and you want them on the team, you don't have to, leaders don't need titles. Leaders lead regardless of what they're doing. So when you work with people and you associate with people, then you're like, "Hey, let's do this together. Come join the team I'm on." Yeah, you can still do that, or let's kind of work together. Everybody wants to. I used to tell people when I played music, I was like, "I want to be the ugliest and the worst musician in the band." And they're like, "What?" And I'd be like, "Well, I think I'm okay looking, and I'm a pretty good bass player. So if I'm the worst musician in the band, I feel like we're pretty good." And that was always kind of my approach to it. And so, reach out if you have somebody you want to work with, or somebody, whether it's just a collaboration or whether it's to become a regular part of the team, empower your people to be able to do that. So I don't I've posted, I think one time that I was looking for writers, and that was just in the last month. Garrett and Jared and Rich, everybody's out there kind of talking to people. And when they interact with somebody that they like, that they think brings value, they'll be like, "Hey, email this guy," which is me, Dennis at dynastynerds.com. They're like, "Email this dude and talk with him." Now, as the editor, I do get some leeway if somebody, they may have a great interaction on Twitter with somebody, and then they submit a writing sample and it's awful. then I have some leeway to go, let's talk about this, Rich, or let's talk about this, Jared. I get it. How do we bridge this gap from, hey, great Twitter personality to great writer? Sometimes that gap can be significant.
Dude, I love that quote you just said. I'm actually putting it right now on Twitter, of course. It's something where, we have people at Fantasy Intervention who are taking lead on certain things. And, the way that I've repaid them, because we're not a profitable company at this point, the way that I've taken lead is, hey, I'm going to give them a percentage of the company, because if they're willing to lead without having a title, if they're willing to take initiative without having to, sit there and be acknowledged for it, then they deserve, a portion of the pie, like you talked about. So let's go ahead and let's dump onto the pet peeves of your, the more, I guess, individual things that happen within articles, because obviously a lot of these writers want to know, hey, what should I not do in an article? Like, what should I not put in an article? So what are some of your pet peeves when it comes to that? Mine, for example, is using that. That should do this, or that should do that. My previous editor with Dynasty Happy Hour ingrained, pretty much just drilled into my head that should never be used, the word that. So.
Well, for me, I'm trying to not lose the writer's voice when I'm editing. And I can get fairly colloquial, or however you pronounce that word, when I'm talking. But I do think there's a line when you are writing that you have to be careful about being too casual in an article or being too familiar in an article. So there's some of that. Like for me, I typically don't let wanna and gonna get through. We're going to. We want to. Well, you'll get the occasional.
That's a good one.
But I've reached out to a couple other editors just to talk, because I'm a big believer. I'm not trained in editing. I feel like I'm a pretty good writer, but sometimes, I'll write an article and I'll slap it into Grammarly and it'll be like, you have 97 suggestions. I'm like, what the hell did I do? Now, granted, Grammarly is not the be all end all, but
no, it's not. But because of Dynasty Nerds, by the way, I actually bought Grammarly for the team. So they actually have access to Grammarly, and Dynasty Nerds was the reason that I did that, because it makes your job so much easier.
And because a lot of it is just simply about speed and execution. I can read and reread and reread and still miss comma placements. I can hit Grammarly and it'll be like, hey, you have these commas that need fixed, and maybe it's good or maybe it's not. Maybe, there are times where it'll say you need to put a comma there, and I'm like, I'll read the sentence and I'm like, nah. Passive voice is another one.
Yeah, the passive
it always suggests passive voice, but I've reached out to other editors and I've adopted the philosophy of this. Like we've got a couple people that are very, very anti-passive voice, and that's great. Then submit stuff without passive voice. But my philosophy is, look, we're not working on getting a Pulitzer here. So if there's some passive voice things that work in the sentence, we're going to let those go. I'm not going to go through and send everything back to a writer because they've got a 1,200 word article and there's 7 passive voice issues. This sounds okay. Let's move on.
No, but
I guess I don't have a ton of pet peeves. So I tend to be very transactional in the editing process. It doesn't, because I run stuff through I use the different tools to make sure, the tools on WordPress and the tool and Grammarly and whatnot. I tend to work on educating the writers to take care of those things before they tell me it's ready. But also, sometimes it's just like I can do it in 20 minutes or 30 minutes and work through those things. Like sentence length is a great one. Like WordPress will tell you, they want no more than 25% of the sentences to be more than 20 words. And then somebody submits an article that has 64% of their sentences are more than 20 words. And so regression.
You have to
again.
figure out a way to break that up, and that's tough for you to break that up individually. We'll still keep the writer's voice behind it.
But I totally relate to it. So I quit school when I was 15 years old. I dropped out of high school. I hitchhiked across the country. I did all kinds of. I did all sorts of stuff. Now I was an avid reader. I read literally every day. I went back and got my GED when I was 25. I started college when I was 35, and I graduated from college when I was 45. I thought 55 was going to be great, but we had a pandemic, so it's not my fault. I had all good stuff on the fives.
56 will be cool. 56 will be cool.
But I remember thinking that, I feel like I'm a fairly intelligent person, and I would have the tendency to use long sentences and big words to subtly express how smart I was. When it comes to like reading an article, nobody, it doesn't really make the point you want, I think, when you have a 46-word sentence that covers 4 lines of the article. And so, I'll kind of go back and I'll start to break that up myself. And now that we have more editors, what we're looking at is like, who are those offenders? Who tends to submit stuff like that? And then now I have time to go back and say, hey, let's take a look at your original here. We've made some changes so we can publish it tomorrow morning. But here's one of the things I want you to look at. Click this little button here and look at all of these. This makes it, it may feel like it sounds better. It makes it harder to read. What are the excess things that can come out of it? Do you need to make 3 points in one sentence? Things like that. And now that we have more editors, it's going to allow time for us to work more with the development. I agree. Less is more. But for a long time, that was how I made myself feel like I was. It was a psychological thing. As a high school dropout, I needed to make myself feel better about how smart I was. And to do that, I use big words and long sentences.
In all actuality, it's kind of like, hey, we want to keep this simple because we're going to get more listens. We're going to get more people that, can understand what you're saying. The more simple it is, without being, too elementary, of course. So that's a big part to it. But, my rule of thumb, and this isn't a technical rule, but if it goes on, beyond 2 full lines, where you overlap the second line, you probably want to just take a second look at that and figure out if you can reword it. If you can't, it's no big deal.
Right.
But, like if it goes beyond 2 full lines, it's like, okay, just take a look at it and see if you could have phrased this any other way. And so, readability comes into play a lot when it comes to that kind of stuff. But when we have the SEO, is this something that you work with at all, Dennis? Like, do you work with SEO and trying to get things greenlighted?
We are. I do look for that and try to. Part of where I'm at now is getting started in the SEO education department. Not meaning teaching it, but learning it. Sometimes I stumble across something that we get the green light and it's good to go, and I'm like, wow, that was great. Other times I'll keep changing it out, and I'm like, oh, geez. And finally I'm like, screw it, yellow's good enough. And other times it's like one phrase will get you green on one article, and the same phrase in another article about the same topic won't. And it's like, why? I don't get. I'm not smart enough at it yet.
It's to break down and actually relate to the rest of your article. So if you use that phrase in your article a bunch of times, essentially it turns into green light. But we actually have Jacob over there who's done a phenomenal job for us, green light and everything. And we went from getting 1 click off of search results in the first month we wrote articles for Google searches, up to about 20% of our clicks come from Google searches now. So, and we're getting, thousands and thousands of clicks. So it's something that's very important in my opinion. But I think that's something that I want to save for another show. I just didn't know if you dove into it or not, because I noticed you put headings into a lot of my stuff and you kind of, altered in that sense. So.
Well, and I'm working on getting myself educated about the things that the Google search grabs. And that's really part of it is just my evolution of becoming a better editor. Sometimes they'll grab H1s instead of H2s. And so
Yep.
I'm geared where I used to, tier the headings down a lot more. Now I'll use a lot more of the H1s and H2s. We just had a new writer, Mike O'Malley, start a few weeks ago, and his first article came out on Tuesday about T.Y. Hilton. And I don't do a lot of searching for our articles unless I'm trying to find something or I'm looking to see, will it show? But when I open Google on my phone, it always has a suggestion of articles that they think I want to read. And it was cool that, here's Mike's first article on Tuesday, and it popped up in like the third or fourth article that they suggested that I read was his T.Y. Hilton article.
Dude, that's awesome. I'm actually going to give him a shout out in the Slack chat because you just referenced a brand new writer, which, doesn't happen very often when, it comes to SEO performance and whatnot. But yeah, no. So sitting there, let's go ahead and close this episode out. Do you have a writer that always checks every box over there at Dynasty Nerds? Regardless of whatever article they put out, when it comes to content, when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to value that you think, applies at the time. Do you have a few writers that, you really gravitate towards over there at Dynasty Nerds? And I know there's a lot of them. So,
well, I wouldn't say I gravitate towards them. I appreciate when they write. So Eric Haroff, I think it's EJH, some numbers on Twitter. IDP guy, he writes for the Draft Bible as well, does a IDP Devi Grind podcast. His articles, now he's a former editor, and his articles very rarely need anything done. Like they have everything. The headings are great. Occasionally there might be something where I'll change a number to the word or something like that. Or maybe there might be an occasional hyphen somewhere. For the most part, his articles, they have a great closing. He wraps up the article nice, has his shout out to himself where you can find him. Ethan Wyatt, who just got promoted to editor, and Dwight Peebles, who just got promoted to editor. That's Ethan A. Wyatt on Twitter and FF Peebles Champ on Twitter. Both of them typically submit very, very tight articles. So there's some that I and part of it too is, so I've been doing this for I feel like a year and a half now or something like that, or at least a year. I've been editing, and some of the things happen because of the transactional nature of it. Sometime to get them out, I don't have a lot of time or spend a lot of time working on development. Now I will send things back occasionally, or I'll cut a piece out and say, this doesn't make any sense to me. And kind of have them help me figure things out. Part of what we're going to be doing going forward, we're going to start to hold some more workshops. We're going to update some of our how-to stuff, make things easier. It seems like every time I get like super comfortable with WordPress, they do an update and I can't find something. But we want to work to develop, because for me, nothing makes me happier than seeing you guys go on and be successful on your own, or seeing guys like Marvin Eloquin get picked up by the fantasy footballers. Those are the types of things that we're looking to help, because most unless you're ESPN or Yahoo, you can't really support a full-time 150 person editorial team, content team. You just don't have the resources for it. So
no, that's absolutely true. And it's great to see people progress and move on from what you're doing because you taught them how to do it.
Yep. And not necessarily teach them. It's I like to think of it as, it's like the difference between high school and college. In high school, they're teaching you. In college, it's your responsibility to learn.
So guiding you to an extent.
Yeah. Give you the tools. Now learn it.
I feel like I'm on a commercial right now for one of those tech companies. I love it, man. Thank you for joining us today, Dennis. Like it's been a pleasure. I admire all the work you've done for Dynasty Nerds, and I continue to look forward to providing content for them as well. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a a busy season for me, although we're not even in season. But yeah, I appreciate you for making time for us and coming on. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You want to give everybody a chance to know where to find you and where to go?
They don't know where to find me?
Maybe
word.
not. Who knows?
At culture_coach is where you can find me on the Twitter machine.
And of course, Dynasty Nerds. If you guys ever write for them, you all know where to find them. So no, go check them out over there at Dynasty Nerds and at Culture Coach. Listen, we appreciate you guys for coming in. Make sure you guys go check us out at fantasyintervention.com, where we have all the writing standards listed for you all. A guide to know what to follow and how to get noticed by some of these people. You all can also go find some companies that are looking for new writers over there at fantasyintervention.com. Just hit the Join Our Circle tab. We appreciate you guys for coming in. Make sure you guys go follow, Join Our Circle on YouTube, youtube.com/fantasyintervention, and of course, Twitter, Join Our Circle _. Make sure you include the underscore, because if you don't, you're going to be following a knitting company. Anyways, we appreciate you guys for tuning in, and thank you guys for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. We're out.